everybody, to yet another episode of Disruption Talks. And who doesn't love taxes? Probably many of our audience. And joining us today is Jody Padar, Head of Tax Strategy and Evangelism at April. Hi, Jody.
Hey, how are you?
Absolutely fine, despite us being so close to Monday. So I gotta tell our audience, you also are known under the hat of the Radical CPA, right? I mean, you have 650,000 followers, probably still 700,000 on LinkedIn, many more on other social media platforms. So I want to make sure that everybody who's listening here just knows that we're both speaking to you in the hat from April, but also the Radical CPA, right?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. I'm probably one of only a few branded CPAs in the world.
Yeah, I mean, one might not consider that the immediate sort of space in business or finance, much rather, that would garner such publicity. But hey, here we are. So congrats on being one of the few. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, but I'm asking that question also for the audience. I've listened to other podcasts of yours. I've went up and down your LinkedIn profile, but the story from you is the story from you. So if we could have that.
Sure. So about 15 years ago, I had been in like regular CPA firms, traditional types of firms, and I left because I came off a really bad tax season and I had had enough. And I started like my own firm, joined my dad who had a 1040 practice. And he said to me, well, I thought I was just going to work for him, right? And he said to me, go find your own clients. And it was the best advice ever because I actually had to learn how to build a business, right? So I built my firm. And what was happening at that time was we were using this thing called the cloud. Well, actually, it was the internet back then. It wasn't even called the cloud. And what I realized is when you use technology and you started to do CPA type things, accounting and taxes and payroll and things like that, all of a sudden the shift changed as to how you worked with your client. And really, it's the real-time disruption. It's not necessarily the software that creates the change in a firm. And so I was one of those early adopters. What they call the new firm today is actually the firm I kind of created, and it sounds kind of I don't know, elitist, but like we were doing this stuff 15 years ago and now they're doing it today and they act like it's new, but really we were doing it 15 years ago. And what happened is, where do you go to find out how to evolve things? Well, you go to Twitter, of course. So I went to Twitter and I found a young group of CPAs who were just like me at the time. And we started to figure out what this firm would look like. And it's very different than a traditional firm in that you would, you build differently, you work with your clients differently, et cetera. So, and I was very upset with the software in the world that we were using, right? And so software people will say, we need more users, and users will say we need better software, right? And it's this chicken and the egg. And so I kind of took it upon myself to go to social media and blog about needing better software. So so that's how I kind of got my product background, right? So fast forward, I've like worked to create this new firm. I'm working with software people to kind of evolve tax software, accounting software as a whole. And I write a book, and that's how I got the name The Radical CPA, right? So it was actually my publisher who did it. But again, we were the disruptors so many years ago. So anyways, like I just kind of came into this software world, right? And so then what happened is after I came into the software world, I started working with like kind of what's next, right? So after you've kind of changed your firm, what's next? Well, artificial intelligence, machine learning are kind of the next frontier for CPAs, hence Radical. So Radical's always evolving and always changing. And so I met a guy named Enrico, and I joined a company called BotKeeper, and they do machine learning and artificial intelligence for accounting transactions, so for bookkeeping. And I sold my firm and I became VP of strategy there, and I kind of got my foot into the tech world as being part of a tech startup. And it's kind of funny because it's almost like my midlife crisis, right? So a lot of people realize, so I turned 50 this year, which is kind of cool. And typically a 50-year-old woman doesn't join a tech startup, right? So that's kind of an interesting, it's kind of an interesting evolution. Anyways, I ended up leaving BotKeeper about a year ago. Well, maybe 6 months ago, whatever. And I joined April as head of tax strategy and evangelism. And the idea behind that role is we're building new tax software to change the world. So I've already kind of changed the world in the accounting world and in with CPAs, and now I'm ready to disrupt it even more and really change the consumer market for taxes. And really, we want to take on Intuit, and we want to really make the whole world it easier for them to file taxes and to have a more pleasant experience. And I'm a CPA by trade. I love taxes. I have a master's in tax, so there couldn't be a better role for me than being here at April and leading tax strategy and evangelism.
Good answer, but I wanna pull another topic slightly harder. So, just for our audience's knowledge, Accounting Today top 100 most influential people for the past 10 years. You're a frequent visitor, frequent flyer. The book that you mentioned, From Success to Significance: The Radical CPA Guide, and The Radical CPA: The New Rules for Future Ready Firm, and Botkeeper for Dummies. So we're going to drop some of those links in the comments as well. But I want to ask you this, because on your LinkedIn profile, we can read being radical means being different from what is traditional or ordinary or average. It's that basic and it's that important. And I want to understand the parallels that you've discovered between the radicalism that you preach over here with regards to the CPA and the radicalism in the spectrum of April. How radical are they in being sure that they're not ordinary, not average? What makes them none of those things?
Yeah, so April as an idea even is radical, right? So if you think about tax software as a whole, tax software has been run by 3 industry players over the last 30 years, really my whole career. So we have Thomson Reuters, we have Intuit, and we have Wolters Kluwer, and those are the 3 incumbents of the tax space. Nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but there are a couple people who have dipped their toes into the tax space, but nobody has really chosen to take them on. And we at April are saying, look, there's a better, easier way to do taxes, and we're going to challenge those incumbents. And that's what's radical. And if you think about it, software's changed so much in 30 years, but tax software hasn't. So there's this huge opportunity to change. It's not even incremental change, it's truly like revolutionary change because nothing's changed in 30 years. So, like, we have this wide open space. And what's pretty cool about it for me was it was a blank slate, right? Like, basically a blank piece of paper to say, okay, what is tax software going to look like in the future? What is the product going to look like? And for me, I couldn't pass it by.
Absolutely, that makes sense. So I want to ask this, other than the evangelism part, so pretty much what we're doing today, hopefully over the following 60 minutes, the rest of your title reads Head of Tax Strategy at April. I don't want to ask what a day in the life looks like, because I'm pretty sure every day looks differently, but something about the scope of your responsibilities, challenges, opportunities. What's it like?
Sure. So we're hiring a ton. So most of my day takes up interviewing, right? So because I'm building a team. But really, tax strategy to me means working with product to build a better product, like based in tax strategy, right? So how do we show up as tax software to the consumer, and how do we make it simple for them, right? And so really working hand in hand with product to make sure that that when you use April, you have a really amazing experience, and that it's not a tax-based experience. And I can tell you that's hard for me. Product challenges me every day saying, make it simpler. Tell me in English, teach it to me in English. Don't use tax, right? Because as a CPA, so many times we go right to technical because that's what we're comfortable with. And product challenges me every day telling me to make it simpler. So hopefully, and I believe we will, our product is going to be the simplest tax thing out there so that you don't have to know taxes and you will still get to an awesome tax outcome as, someone who's using some, I'll say, complicated words in the way they prepare taxes.
Okay. And just as a smooth transition between what we're talking about, April, and the broader context of the entire industry, a couple months ago, we were hosting a company called Contest, German-based, focusing on tax services for freelancers in Germany. And the reason for existence of such a niche sort of region-based is, of course, regulation, right? Because it's very difficult to try to tackle multiple regulations. I, of course, have gone through the April website, and I know that, for example, one of the limitations is if you're trying to file from 3 or more states. So if we're talking about that level of complexity, even just within one country, one needs to simply recognize that those tax systems are country specific. And even though they are very much familiar with other European countries' tax systems, they're not planning to expand their services to other markets. You see where I'm going with this? April,
Yeah.
expansion strategy, obstacles.
Yeah, so taxes are very complex, right? Like tax software is very complex. So right now we're not planning to go international at all. We have enough going on just in the U.S. between U.S. taxation and then like all the states. So in every state we have different tax systems as well. So you can think of it like 50 different countries, right? Well, some of them don't actually have tax systems. So there's some that you don't have to pay taxes on the individual level in certain states. But basically, we have a bunch of states we have to get done first. And then my thought is, from an expansion standpoint, we'll go to partnerships and corporate and all the other types of tax systems, not just individual taxation, which I think is probably unique to the IRS, because I know a lot of times most countries in Europe, they actually take your taxes out at the company level, and then you don't necessarily have to file an individual tax form. So we're starting with 1040s, but I know we'll probably expand to be basically the tax brain of the US. I mean, that's kind of a crazy big dream, but it's like amazing, right? And then we'd go into the professional market later down the road too. And I think that's too, there's a huge opportunity in the professional market because CPAs are evolving, right? So what's a radical CPA? A radical CPA is CPAs using the latest technologies, right? And in the future, we'll be able to serve those CPAs as well. And by doing that, we'll let them elevate themselves to be more advisors, because we know software is going to do the work. Like machine learning, artificial intelligence, it's here, it's coming. We know our jobs as CPAs are going to change. And how can we help those CPAs evolve as well? So that's really too one of like my loves, and why I joined April, is because I knew that eventually we would be serving CPAs again, and CPAs are my people.
The brain, the tax brain of America. I mean, what other dreams are you going to have than dreams of that size? So, let's
Yeah,
stick to
it's
that.
crazy talk, but it's not so crazy, right? So
Oh
like
yeah.
like you have to have that big goal to work towards, but like don't kid yourself. We know that we're starting very small and we have to take one step at a time. So as much as I love the idea of the big tax brain, I know it's not tomorrow, right? It might be a couple of years. No, it's probably be a few more than a couple of years, but yeah, that would be
You know,
amazing.
brains take their time to develop, so surely. And you mentioned that it's Reuters, Kluber, and Intuit, right? TurboTax. It's one of those products from those companies, or
Yeah, TurboTax is an Intuit product.
yeah, that's the only one I've seen in the sort of accounting memes on Instagram. So that's the
Right.
only familiarity I have of what you're talking about from my day-to-day usage. And that's correct. In Europe, you do have many of the employers, given that it is not a freelance contract but an employment contract, just filing a lot of that stuff to the government, and you're just basically having to confirm. So definitely different than in the US. Speaking of brains development and that metaphor, what is broken in the tax systems, aka neurological systems today? You can speak about US if you have something to say about Europe. More than welcome. Any other continent, any geographical location is welcome.
So the U.S. tax system is broken because Congress is broken. So a lot of people think the IRS writes law, like is in charge of taxes. No, the IRS is in charge of collecting taxes. They're the administration part, but taxes are actually created by Congress and law, and they're signed into law by president. Well, in the U.S., obviously, um, you know, our Congress is split, right? They can't get anything accomplished. Nobody can agree on anything. And so what happens is taxes get caught in that same type of making a law, in that nobody can agree on anything. And then what happens is all these special interest groups come in and they place things into the tax code, and the Congress votes for them because, they want to get reelected, because in our system, you're getting elected every 2 years, right? So you want to stay in your position of power. And so they serve their constituents, and they serve their constituents a lot of times by creating taxes to help them, or lowering taxes to help them, right? And so then what happens is you have this enormous tax code that nobody can make sense of. And obviously, yeah, people can make sense of it. Attorneys and tax people can, but the average everyday consumer cannot make sense of the tax code because it's become so complex, because everyone in Congress has added so much of their own personal stuff for like their constituents, that now it's just this big behemoth of text, and it's really hard. And so, oh, let's simplify tax, right? Let's make it a flat tax, and everyone will be taxed 10%, and we won't have to deal with the tax code. Well, this is years of bringing this about, and I don't think it's ever going to go away, because Congress isn't going to like kind of say, oh no, we're not going to, we're going to change the tax code and make it simple. It's just not going to happen, right? And so it's good for us, and it's good for April, because it means I'm always employed, right? Because I have a master's in tax. But the idea behind it is that what we at April can do for that is to make it simpler for the everyday person. So let's put technology on top of a broken tax code and make it so that it's simpler for people to understand and people to interact with. And that's one of our goals at April, is like, we know the tax code's not going, well, we changes every year, but we know it's not going to go away. So how do we make it simpler and accessible for everyday people? And we don't, they don't have to have a master's in tax to understand what's going on. They can just do their return, and it's not so scary. They can be engaged with it all year long, which is one of the things we're trying to do. And again, then it's not like this big surprise at the end of the year, which a lot of people are surprised by. Either they're getting a huge refund or they owe, and like, really there should be no surprises in taxes, like, because if you're watching your stuff all year long, it should just be basically, a filing at the end of the year. So yeah, that was probably a long answer, but in reality, yeah, the tax code's not going to change. The only thing we can do, I think, as Americans and as software people, is make it simpler for people to actually interact with it.
I agree, especially I'm pretty sure this isn't the local saying, but we do have a frequent manner of repeating this, that it would be great if the government didn't expect everybody to be an accountant by profession alongside with their actual
Right.
field business, right? So when you speak of this layer of tech on top of the inefficient law, let's say, I see a question in the comments from Zofia: how does April imagine their services in 5 years? Which by accident, so to say, given the route of our conversation, is also a question of, do you think that within the 5 years, the complexity of the tax system will continue to rise? It will maintain, perhaps thanks to tech, the legislators will be able to make smarter decisions?
So I think it's only going to get more complicated. I think that, again, there's too many special interest groups going through things. And just even look at the pandemic, right? 2 years ago, when the pandemic hit, how did they get money to the US citizens? They changed the tax code to release, we had stimulus payments, and they were distributed by the IRS. So the IRS really is kind of the money movement place of the US. Like, it's how they move money, and they a lot of actually the tax code is giving people benefits, right? So our underprivileged people get a lot of actual benefits through the tax code as well. But so I think that's not going to go away. I think taxes are only going to get more complex. And I think April's going to keep up with that complexity, but I also believe that April will go into other taxes, such as corporate taxes and partnership taxes. So and the thing is, they're all interrelated. A lot of people say, oh, like a 1040 in your individual taxes kind of stand alone. For 75% of the people, they do stand alone. For 25% of them, you have something called a flow through entity, which is either a partnership tax return or an S Corp tax return. And that has a direct interrelationship to your 1040. And so that's where we would evolve to. That's what I see us. And again, that's how we're going to build out that tax brain, right? So like, we're going to put every type of US tax, probably not payroll taxes, but other taxes into that tax brain. And then, I mean, again, crazy talk, but like, this is like the grand vision is financial planning financial planning actually should happen in connection to taxes, because taxes are your biggest bill, right? That your taxes are your biggest expense. Yet so much of financial planning happens outside of the world of taxes, which doesn't make any sense, because taxes are actually your biggest expense. So what if that tax brain now could could connect to every financial institution in the US, and it would be live intersecting with it, and we would be able to do tax planning all year round. Again, those are kind of crazy dreams of ours, but like nothing's impossible if you put your mind to it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. That makes complete sense. So, on your LinkedIn, once again, like I said, we read it thoroughly. I want to bring the accounting profession to the digital age and lead the next generation of accounting professionals to a better life where they can go home on time, give more to their clients, and foster their passion for the industry. This is what strategic advisory and tech can do for us. My question: how does the relationship between accounting and tech look like these days? Have you observed any significant changes in the recent years? And I know that you said that one needs to live with the other, otherwise, it'll just go crazy. But uh, perhaps over the recent years, you've seen more of a shift because you've said at the beginning of our conversation, this is something that you have discovered, invented 15 years ago, right? So I'm curious, is it more of a feeling of catching up, something else?
Yeah, so the good thing is and again, if there's a silver lining of the pandemic, is the pandemic really pushed our profession forward, right? They no longer could just say, "Oh, like we're just going to continue doing it the way we were," because obviously when everyone went remote, all of a sudden work had to change. And that's happening not just in our industry, that's happening in every industry, across the world, right? So the pandemic pushed CPAs to change. They're not changing as fast as I would like them to, but they're moving more so than they were in the past. So I think that's a good thing. But I think what's happening too is there's a there's a labor shortage, right? And I'm sure in the US it's really hard to find CPAs. I'm sure there's a labor shortage too, probably happening across the world because I know even people it's hard to find people to outsource to, right? So what's happening is okay, if you don't have labor, what do you do? Well, guess what? If you automate, automation can replace some of that labor. And so it means you can upskill your labor to do other things because automation can do the stuff that people don't want to do that's repetitive in nature, et cetera. So what tech does and how I see tech helping CPAs, and I think what CPAs are finally getting at because of the pandemic and because they can't find people is when you have a really bad problem and you have no solutions, you look to alternatives. Whereas in the past, we always had people to kind of solve that problem. Well, now we don't have people. So now they're having to make a change because they can't find people to do the work. So they can find technology to do that work, and then they can upskill their people to do the work that only people can do. And that's the whole idea of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Everyone's like, oh, it's going to take my job. Yeah, it's going to take the job you didn't want to do anyways, right? It's going to take the repetitive task that's so boring that you didn't want to do it. So instead of looking at 400 transactions as an accountant, you're only going to look at 10. Well, if you only have to look at 10, now you actually have the opportunity to think about those 10 transactions more. So you can add a little bit more insight to it. And I always like to say, or you can go home early. How many like CPAs are known for having crazy hours, right? They work 60 hours a week. Um, for sure during tax season, and then many are working all the time, right? But like that's the whole idea for me of technology is when I left my firm years ago, I was a young mother and it was how could I work smarter so that I could be at home with my kids at a certain amount of time, right? And that's what technology does. It frees up time. And then, with that time, what can you do? You can either get more clients, you can do more advisory work, or you can go home early, which I think people don't want to admit, but everybody wants to go home early.
Can't blame them, right?
Right?
So you are smoothly sailing into the next area I wanted us to talk about. And uh, tax tech is a relatively young ecosystem. And also, I'd like you to confirm this for me if possible. Tax, would you say it's a child of the entire legal family, or would you paint this as a completely separate animal, somehow akin to each other?
So I think tax is a child, right? Because taxes are created by laws. So if you actually, the attorneys that make a lot of money, they're the tax attorneys. I always say if you want to be an attorney who makes the most amount of money, become a tax attorney, right? That's one of the that's one of the things that they say in the U.S. But so taxes are really a part of the legal system, and then they get complied by and people do them, and typically that's where like accountants come in. And then like again, I have a master's in tax, which means I have a whole body of like I spend 10 courses just studying the tax code, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, that our code is complex enough that you can get a master's degree in it. But anyways, so that's the complexity of the code. And then I think where technology comes in is technology hasn't changed in 30 years. So we just have this huge opportunity to make things better because it hasn't changed. And the reason the old technology companies, those incumbents, haven't changed their tax software in 30 years or whatever, they have changed it, but they've only changed it every year to update the tax code. So it's very engineers are expensive, right? So it's very expensive to update software when every year you're just updating it based on the tax law changes, let alone think about like redesigning it or thinking about making it simpler to use. So the software company in the past, I'm not going to diss them, they've kept up with the market, right? They updated the software and they changed it as they needed to because the tax code changed, and so the calculations had to change, and so they kept up with that, right? But they never actually made it more user friendly. They never actually redesigned it to work in today's world, right? So with today's technology, the reason we at April believe we have this opportunity to change things is because technology has changed so much in 30 years. We believe now that what used to take 250 engineers is now going to take 50 engineers, right? Because the technology like just does things differently, and we're not building on this archaic system that's 30 years old that like these prior tax software companies have done. And if you think about it too, like it's like kind of like Netflix, right? Like, do you switch from mailing DVDs out to streaming, even though you know it's going to eat up your business? Absolutely, you have to. But these incumbents, they have legacy products. And how do they go through that change? It's really hard for them. And that's why startups come into old industries, right? Because they come in to disrupt that, because most of the legacy businesses, they're cash cows. Why are they going to change their business model? They're making money. They're laughing all the way to the bank. Why would they change? Well, hopefully they see that the market around them is changing. I don't know if they do or they don't, but if the market around them changes, then that gives an opportunity for a startup to come in and actually disrupt the industry as a whole. And you can tell that this is a market to disrupt because the VCs are throwing money at it. So where money goes, change follows. And so that's one of the things that's really evolved over the last 15 years that I've realized in practice is the VC money that's coming into the accounting space that never was there when I was there. And it's coming in multiple ways. It's coming in tech, in like startups. So like BotKeeper got money, April has money, right? We have VCs that are investing us, but also VCs are investing in old school CPA firms. They're buying them up. They're doing mergers and acquisitions around them because they know that CPA firms generate money, and VCs go where the money is. So they invest in them and they want their return. So that's why the industry of accounting and tax is going to change. That's why tech is going to have a big play in it, because if money comes into a space, change and evolution follows. And that's what I see happening. And I'll say that's how the market has significantly changed over, I would say, even the last 5 years.
I mean, what else can be said? If you have three players, so one bar monopoly, or almost duopoly,
Right.
then you are looking at very little incentive to add more than what is necessary and gets the painful job of taxes done. So just like you mentioned, with all the legacy systems in play, all the long year expanding contracts, it's just a Titanic kind of ship that can't make a smooth and swift change of course. So after hearing this, I think my question I was about to ask is rather invalid, because I wanted to use the word groundbreaking when asking you about the most groundbreaking changes that tech enabled for the tech industry. But should I be repositioning this question to not past 5 years, but upcoming 5 years?
Yeah, I would say going towards the future, right? So what's groundbreaking of tax in the future? So there's this new category called embedded tax, and that's what April is. And everyone wants to embed everything. So April's not, I'll say, the first one to embed things. If you talk to payroll companies now, they have embedded payroll. And again, the whole idea of embedded means you're B to B to C. So basically, you're selling something to another corporation, another company, and they're giving it to their customers. They're selling it to their customers to allow for those consumers to have advantage of something else, right? Like it's their customers that they're delighting. And so where April is different, and this is kind of where this market is happening, is there's this new category called embedded tax. Deloitte did a big paper on it with Teammate and April. And it means that the way we're going to market is B2B to C, which means we're being embedded in banking apps. And then the bank is either selling the tax software to their customer, or they're giving it to their customer as a value add, which is kind of cool. It's good for April because it means we don't have to go B2C, which it's very expensive to acquire customers in the B2C market. I mean, like, it's crazy amounts of advertising dollars, right? But I think it's good for the consumer because they trust their bank. And so their bank has already done the due diligence to say, hey, look, this is legit. Go ahead and file your taxes with this app. So there's an immediate trust thing. There's also a banking opportunity there. And that's why April is fintech. So we're not just tax software, we're actually fintech, because if you think about tax software, it's a way to move money. Money moves through taxes. So you get your refund from the government, and it comes through your tax return, right? You get you have the opportunity to invest in an IRA, and when you invest in an IRA, you get a deduction on your tax return. So that's moving money, right? And so if you think about fintech, that's why it connects to banks, because when you put tax software inside banking software, now you have an opportunity to move money between the two. And that's the shift that I think is going to change. That's going to make things different in the future, because banking is going to be really connected to tax, and it's always been connected, but not so tightly. And we're not the only ones doing it. Cash App has tax software in their app now. So I don't know if you know Cash App, it's similar to Venmo or something, like, right? So they have tax software embedded now. Intuit opened has its own banking line. So Intuit now connects their taxes with banking. And H&R Block, who's an incumbent in the US for tax preparation, they are working with, I think they bought a bank, or they did something with a bank. So that shows you the market is moving towards this whole thing called embedded tax, and that money movement and taxes are going to, or fintech, I'll say, not just money movement, fintech, embedded taxes, and money movement, it's all going to come together in the next 5 years. What's going to happen to professionals as this evolves? I actually think it's good for tax professionals. And the reason I think that is because tax professionals, it's very expensive for a tax professional to prepare a tax return. And this serves the market that most tax professionals are trying to get out of it. Most CPA firms do 1040 returns because they have to, not because they want to. And so this allows their customers to be really connected to them, and they'll be able to do more because they can do more advisory on top of it and not necessarily spend so much time doing the work. And so I actually think it's good for the whole community. I think it's good for tax professionals. I think it's good for the consumers. I think it's good for banks. I think it's actually good for everyone. And when you see all these players getting engaged in it, it only makes that category more solid to say, hey, yeah, look, this is where taxes are moving. Because if you're the only person out there, you have to change the market. Well, now we have five plus different businesses that are kind of attacking the market from different perspectives, and they're going to change that 1040 market. And the last piece about banking connected to taxes is it means you can do a lot more real-time planning. So when you think about banking and lending and fintech, how fintech has changed lending, right? Now, like, you can get a loan online because they connect to your bank account and they can actually see that there's cash in there, right? They can see the transactions. So think about that, and you connect it to a tax return, what the opportunities are for planning or for making taxes more every day and not just a once a year thing, where now your taxes can be, you can be engaged with your bank and your tax return all year long. And to me, that's exciting. People are probably like, oh my God, like I hate taxes. I want to see my taxes once a year. Please don't tell me it's going to be every day. But quite honestly, if you're looking at your taxes every day or they're connected to your banking like that, it's not so scary, because you'll know what you owe or what your refund is much sooner. So it won't be this big surprise April 15th, which is where it currently sits.
I mean, it always does have this lottery feel, right? Did I tax right? Did what's the number? Do I have to pay something? Who made the mistake? Did anybody make a mistake? So always a topic on your mind when it comes to that. So I wanted to move slightly to some relevant comment questions, but just before, you did mention that tech will eat up some of the jobs. Is there a moment in time, and this applies as much, for example, to legal tech as it does to tax tech, that the software becomes so knowledgeable, so in depth, so inter-regulatory systems, so considerable and sensitive to nuances, that actually the job that we know today done by humans might stop being done by humans? Or is there a solid moat for mankind that basically ensures this is impossible?
So I think there's a solid moat for mankind. I think all it does is it synthesizes information a lot more. So it actually means you have to be smarter to kind of understand how all that information is synthesized. So if you think about attorneys and tax people are professional services, means they have a body of knowledge and a body of experience of understanding all this information together. They have context for the content. If you look at, and that's how a professional is going to make sure that you're making the right decision based on your facts and circumstances. You can go to the internet right now and find out all kinds of tax things, but I guarantee when all these different things come up, even you do all your research, most people sit there and then they're befuddled because they're like, okay, should I do this? Should I do that? This guy says this guy says that. And they still can't make a decision. And that's where professionals are going to end up being connected to their clients. And they already are. It's just now there's more information out there for your client to understand, which quite honestly is nice, because they come in, they already have a basis of knowledge, and now you can actually help them understand how it applies to their facts and circumstances, how it's special for them, and kind of to walk alongside them and help them make decisions, which is kind of the cool stuff that CPAs and attorneys do anyways. It isn't necessary. Like if you talk to any CPA, all the CPAs will say is like, what do you love about your work? And they'll all say, I love my clients. They don't say, oh, I love code section 1031. They say, oh, I love my clients. And so I think it just strengthens that relationship. And again, it gives CPAs an opportunity to spend a lot less time doing the research and actually spending time with their clients or thinking about the alternatives. So I think it's really a good thing. I don't see it. I mean, I see our jobs evolving and changing, but I don't see it's going away. And you can say the same thing about like social media. Like everyone says, well, what are you going to do in the future? And I would say, we don't know what we don't know yet, because social media came around like in 2009, 2008 was when social media really started to get big. And now there's people who have like whole jobs on social media. Social media didn't even exist 15 years ago. When I started my career, there was no such thing. Well, I can even date myself even more, but there was no such thing as social media, right? And people now, they have jobs completely centered around social media. So what technology is going to change that's going to come into our world as CPAs, attorneys, whatever professional services, that's going to even make a whole nother subset of jobs for these professionals to do. So I'm not scared. I'm not scared.
I mean, I wasn't asking for fear. I was asking for answers. But sure, especially that if what you said a moment ago is to be trusted, and I don't see why not. The increasing complexity of the tax code will be competing head to head with the software trying to
Right.
decomplexify it. So, there's going to be plenty of work to go around for everyone. One quick question from the comments. Great talk. Will it be on the podcast too? Yes, shameless plug. It will be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, see you there. And in terms of questions concerning April itself, Paulina asked the following question. Hey, Jody, April received a funding round led by Team 8. I'm curious if you expect any more funding. If yes, what are your plans for investing on these funds? And if that's too detailed a question, feel free to also tell me more about your hand on the pulse, given the VC winter, given the response of the investment party of this entire startup world that we're in.
So we got our first round in January. Well, we announced it, whatever. And it was a good round, and it'll take us fine, but yeah, there's more funding on the horizon. You have to. Tax software is very expensive to build, and so it's going to take money. That's not a surprise. So yeah, there'll be funding rounds in our future. As far as like the market, I think it's interesting to me that the tax market, so this is tax market as a whole. This isn't tax and tech. Tax never goes through a recession because you always pay taxes. So there's always a need for tax professionals. There's always a need for tax software. So it's kind of a recession-proof business, which is kind of cool. So as far as VC funding goes and things like that, I'm not too concerned about it, because we know that it's going to take a lot of money to get to where we need to go, but also we know that taxes are going to be around forever, and that they're not. Yeah, we're not worried about it because taxes are essentially recession proof. And it's kind of funny too, because again, that's something about being a CPA, is like CPAs actually do better in worse times because that's when their clients need them more, right? So you think, oh, they're not going to do as well because we're going into a recession. Well, actually, that's when most businesses actually need their CPAs more, because when things are good, people throw money around, right? They don't necessarily watch it so much. But when things are bad, all of a sudden, oh, that CPA becomes a lot more important to them because, they're making more critical decisions.
Yeah, you're trying to see where you can get some
Right.
tax relief. You're trying to liquidate some assets for emergency cash flow. How do you go about that? And so on and so forth.
Yeah. And my general comment on just on the recession in general, that we're going into recession, is focus on your business and where you provide value, because all this is noise, and your business may just do fine with all the noise happening around it. And I think too many people focus on the noise, and it affects their thinking, instead of going to work every day, focusing on the value they can deliver and actually moving their business forward, because there are lots of businesses that actually do significantly well when times are down, right? Because it's cyclical, and this is not the first recession we're going through, and it'll eventually even itself out. But there are many businesses that do, they almost have rebirths during recessions and things like that. So I'm a positive person, so I always like to focus on the positive, not on the negative.
Yeah, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. That's one, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And, what is crisis? A crisis is very conducive for creativity. If you're faced with scarcity of resources, of money, and of actual problems looming ahead, then what
You
better
think differently, right?
what better combo is just requiring from your brain to think differently and come up with solutions, hopefully. So that was the question from Paulina. Another one we've got from Maria. Maria asks, speaking of the future, could you shed some light on what kind of new features we can expect to be introduced to the app in the nearest future?
So I would say just compliance, right? So as many states as we can get out, we will. So right now, we're obviously we'll have a solid federal app, but states, to us, states are priority. We want to get as many states as we can done. And then we have plans to do, I'll say, other apps that'll go on top of it. So if you think about, you have this tax brain. Once you have that tax brain as your base, you can put all different kinds of apps on top of it, which again, that's what's kind of cool about April as a whole, is after we get the compliance done, and as I should say, not after, as we do compliance, we also have the opportunity to put together planning apps, strategic things. How does it connect to financial planning? Maybe it'll connect to student loans or something else, right? So I think there's lots of opportunity there, and it's really what the market's gonna dictate. And you have to remember, we're a new company. We just started in January. Think about how like I mean, it's 6 months, right? It's kind of crazy when you think about where we are and where we've been in 6 months. When I look back and I started December 1st, I'm like, "Oh my god, like how like so different and yet so amazing as to how much we've accomplished." So, where will we be in another 18 months? It'll just be crazy.
So, am I getting this right? We're going to have an April marketplace essentially for developers to go crazy and figure out their own
So
applications.
I would say it would be I don't know the correct term, but I don't necessarily believe it's a marketplace. I believe they're more strategic partnerships. So,
Okay.
yeah. But yes, lots of different fintechs connect to, right? So fintech is a broad category. So throw Texas into fintech, and now it's even bigger, right? Because where else does fintech intersects in payroll? It intersects all over the place. So
Okay. I also wanted to pick apart one thing you mentioned. Tax software is expensive. Why? How is it?
um
How is the cost structure different to any other type of development, considering fintech alone? Or
so yeah, so it's complexity, right? So it's complexity of the tax code. So for every certainty, there's an exception, right? So it's very similar, I would say, probably to developing some sort of legal software. Whereas when you look at everything, there's lots of gray. And when you think about computers, it's black and white, right? You forget about all the gray, right? And so in the world of taxes, there's so much gray. So how do you build software to do the black and white stuff that but also adjust for the gray? So that's probably it. And you think about it. There's the IRS code. Remember, I said we have all these states. Every state has its own set of tax laws. So at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about expansion. Like, I just say, forget Europe. We got to get through the states, which every code, right? Like every state has its own tax code, and they do things a little bit differently. And so there's a lot of complexity there, and that's why it's expensive to develop.
okay. Um, so yeah, I imagine it must be data heavy, especially that you have all those moving pieces both on the side of the person filing, because well, they might just have, gone from one tax bracket to another, or they may have just passed a
So
specific age. All of those pieces that are moving, and on the other hand side, you have the constantly updating code that also needs to be so perfectly matched with the situation. So I imagine data science, data engineers, all of that is at work a lot of
yeah,
time.
and you got my team there. So my team is the tax team. And so my tax team has to do the tax stuff, right? So you have the tax team that intersects through product with the engineers, and so it's very complex, right? So anyways, but it's not undoable, right? It's been done before. So that's the other thing. Like everyone says, oh, like you're taking on a big thing. And I'm like, yeah, but it's been done. You can say that it's actually been done before. You can't say we're inventing this widget that hasn't existed because it's already existed. So we know we can do it. We just we know it's going to take a lot to get it done.
So I see another question. It sounds like something we might have touched upon a moment ago, but I think you can give us an answer, just giving us sort of a user persona of April, if one
Mhm.
may, because the question comes from Ginny, and she mentions what challenges do U.S. taxpayers face and how they are going to address them. Well, second part of the question, tirelessly every year with a little bit of panic, anxiety, and stress. But with regards to the first part, what are the sort of three things I'd say are indigenous to the U.S. tax system that taxpayers face as a huge issue? Like, what are the three things that every American will respond with? Oh, don't even get me started on ABC.
So I think the thing is, you have a filing deadline, right? So gathering your information. So just the whole idea of compliance, right? Like you have to get your stuff done by April 15th. For whatever reason, it freaks people out, right? So so there's just the whole issue of compliance they have to deal with. The other thing is if they're self-employed, I think that adds a whole new complexity. And it used to be people who were self-employed were, I don't want to say more of a business owner, but the gig economy has really changed that. So now, if you're an Uber driver, if you sell stuff on Etsy, if you do anything in the gig economy, now you have a whole nother level of complexity, which is crazy for someone who's just doing something on the side, or someone who isn't maybe making a lot of money at it, but yet now there's a whole new complexity of tax that's going to get added to them, which I think is an interesting thing that's kind of changed over the years, where that necessarily wasn't so. And then I think last but not least, finding software like that's easy enough for you to do it yourself, right? Because like, do you want to pay a professional to do a 1040? Yes or no? It's getting expensive. And is there an opportunity out there for you to do it yourself? And we hope that with April we can solve that problem.
I can completely see that. And, referring to what you mentioned a while back about how every company that has a rail of finance flowing in, be it a bank, be it anything that can have this parallel layer of let's talk to some tax software at the same time. A similar example, I remember that Uber, at the beginning of their pandemic, I listened to a podcast with their CEO, and he was mentioning how Uber is involuntarily so sort of entering the world of fintech by having to consider financing systems for those sole proprietors that are prior to their first purchase of a car, or will need an advance on their salary still in a contractor
Right.
company relationship. So it's going to be interesting, because if I am Uber, so on one hand side I've got happy people driving in the back seat of the car, on one hand side I've got people who are behind the wheel. And when I'm thinking about the satisfaction of those behind the wheel and not switching to other platforms, I'm thinking of how can I help them get a car? How can I help them get paid on time? And eventually it's going to be in line with what you're saying about the rising complexity. How can I, as Uber, make sure that my drivers spend as little time as possible figuring out their tax stuff and
Right.
just keep on driving? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's something new, right? Again, we were talking at the beginning about the complexity. Just think of how when the world changes, tax law doesn't always catch up to where the world is today. Look at Bitcoin, right? Our tax law isn't really ready for Bitcoin and everything that's happening with Bitcoin. And now they're going after Bitcoin people, right? Like on the tax return now, you have to say, do you have any Bitcoin, or actually cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, but cryptocurrency transactions. And crypto right now is taxed as a capital gain because in the code section it says if you don't know what it is, it should be taxed as a capital gain. Whereas when you think about cryptocurrency, most people think no, it should be taxed like a currency, and you shouldn't have to pay the differences in the fluctuations because it would be a currency. So it's so, like, again, the world changes and tax has to catch up with the world. And so, like, and our world's not going to stop changing. Like, we'd love to say, oh, look, everything that's the way it is today is going to be the way it is in 5 years. Well, it's not. It's going to continue to evolve, and it's going to continue to change. And if it continues to evolve and continue to change, then it means I'm always employed, right? So no, it means that the tax law is going to get more complex, and it's going to have to evolve with it. And as it evolves, then there's more complexity. And then, like I said, that's why taxes, like, taxes never go out of style. We might not be always the most like popular person at the party, but we never go out of style.
Taxes never go out of style. Second quote, just after the other quote that I wrote down, uh, content, context for content, or content for
Yeah.
context. Which one was it? Sorry, either of the two, but I do recall the context of this particular phrase when you mentioned that all software does is just helps humans make human decisions more informed, faster, and with less opportunity for mistakes. Seems like we've maxed out the questions from the audience, which leads me to my final question. The Apple Pencil becomes a magic wand. I virtually hand it over to you and ask you the following. If you're allowed to abracadabra the world such that every 12-year-old is granted access, not forced education, on a specific topic, what would you want them to learn? We've heard a variety of answers. There's no correct or wrong answer. There's just your answer. So by all means, please.
So I would want them to have the love of learning, right? So how do you teach a kid to love learning? I don't necessarily think we do that today in the US. I don't know how it is in Europe. I don't necessarily think we necessarily engage their minds in the right way, because the world is going to continue to change and you have to be a lifelong learner. So it doesn't matter what you know today, it's what you need to learn for tomorrow that's going to keep you relevant, it's going to keep you employable, it's going to do everything, and it makes you just a better person, right? The more you know, the more you learn, right? The curiosity. So and I don't have the magic bullet, but how do we keep that curiosity and love of learning alive in that 12-year-old, so that they realize that they don't just graduate from high school and they're done, they don't just graduate from college and they're done, that they realize that learning is lifelong, and that when they're 80 years old, they're still reading stuff because they love learning, not because they have to. So I would want to teach them how to learn.
I agree on all planes that you've mentioned of this answer. One, especially with what's coming, the typical career path is not going to be a path; it's going to be a web. You need to be prepared for upskilling. Another thing, neuroplasticity. You want to keep this machine going and growing and keeping you from becoming old. And last but not least, curiosity. What you mentioned, curiosity spills out everywhere in your life. If you're genuinely curious, you're much more likely to be interested organically in diversity of a team, because you
Absolutely.
won't be approaching it from why is that different, but why is that different? I want to find out, right? So uh, fantastic bullseye type answer. I just wanted to give you space at the end if there's anything you wanted to say about April, about Radical CPA, anything that's upcoming for either of the two. Definitely, we've heard that you're hiring, so all engineers, go on
Yes.
the careers website.
Absolutely. We're hiring, we're growing, we're building our team. Just I'm excited for the future, right? Like I can't tell you like how excited I am about how tax is changing, how tax is evolving, how the market as a whole is changing. And this is the stuff that I live for. And it's just fun, right? And if you're doing something in your life that's not fun, don't do it. So there's and whatever your interest is, right? So like a lot of people think I'm a little bit crazy because I love taxes, and they like think, how could you be a radical CPA, how could you evangelize for taxes? But when you get into the detail, it's just something I love, and I'm happy to spread the word and happy to get everybody encouraged about taxes moving forward, and what technology is going to look like in the future. And yes, we're hiring. So
Hope you heard, and you heard it here from Jody. So thank you everybody for watching us today. Thank you to your audience, and thank you, Jody. Naturally, you'll be able to hear this on your favorite podcasting platforms, as well as on the social media that this has been live streamed to. Otherwise, see you on our next live stream, physical event, or the every Tuesday Disruption Talks. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Jody, once again.
awesome. Thank you.